so that I don't forget. And we have a great lineup for you today. Alan Hall is going to be first on our agenda, and he's going to share his story with you. And then Charles Dickens is with the Florida Holocaust Museum. And I am pulling up the rear with the information for the newspaper and education program. So I'm going to mention that Mr. Hall said that he does like questions. So if you have a question during his presentation, you can either add it in the chat or you can raise your hand. And Sue Bedry, who is also with the Tampa Bay Times, and I will go ahead and either unmute you or have your question in the chat. I hope that made sense. Alan, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you. As reputed, I am the Holocaust survivor. I came to the United States in 1947 after having experienced the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust, and after having experienced also the Soviet occupation, which was not kind to us either. And before I say anything, I never attended grades 1 through the bulk of grade 5. And I showed up in the last month or two of the 5th grade without knowing how to write, not knowing how to speak, not having a word of English, and not knowing how to read, and having had no basis in arithmetic. I have now a law degree and an engineering degree, and I attribute all of my successes, and I'm going to repeat, all of my successes to my teachers. What I'm trying to say to you folks is it's an honor. It is truly an honor to have an opportunity to speak to you. I hold you in very, very high regard. And let me say this to you. Very few of us have the opportunity to really make a difference in the world. And every one of your teachers, by the virtue of the fact that you come in contact within dozens, if not hundreds of students each year, in the course of a career, you really make a difference. You impress hundreds and probably tens of thousands of students. And I hold you in awe, and I hold the teaching profession with a great deal of gratitude, because all that I am today is thanks to you teachers, your predecessors in the profession. So thank you. As I started saying to you, well, first of all, let me just introduce myself. Oftentimes people ask me what's my name, and that always gives me a chuckle, because if I want to kind of dodge the question, I say Alan Hall, and that is the name I go by today. But the truth is that I was born as Adam Janusz Horowitz. And during the war, we could not survive with Jewish names. So Horowitz became Vironsky, Potocki, Horsky, all kinds of different Polish names, nearly every one of them ending in SKI, which is a traditional ending for Polish names. At the end of World War II, when we came to the United States, I should say, my name was Adam Janusz Horsky. My dad's brother, who immigrated years before the war, said, Adam, that's not an American name. Well, I desperately wanted to be an American. So I inquired, what is an American name? And he told me it was Allan. Mind you, I did not know how to spell Allan. And I can show you my 6th grade papers with Allan being spelled in all different ways, perhaps even including the French way. But anyways, finally I settled on my current spelling, which is Allan. We came here begging for asylum, were granted, actually we came here on false passports, begging for asylum, were granted asylum, and then 5 years later, we were made U.S. citizens. By the way, when we were in our process of requesting asylum, we literally were hiding here in the United States. But for us, hiding was a matter of second nature. So going back to my early history, in addition to my name, my persona was quite different. I was born to an upper middle class family. My dad was one of six, three of whom immigrated, one to Argentina and two to the United States, and the other three stayed in Europe, and two died, and we were the only ones who survived. On my mother's side, she was a professional violinist, an accomplished violinist, and she was one of two daughters, and I am all that's left of that family. The entire family was wiped out, including cousins, etc. Uh, it's hard to say, why do I speak? And more importantly, why do you listen? Why are we here this evening? Well, there's really only one reason. And it's interesting because I just wrote an affidavit tonight about that very thing. I don't think that many people care what happened to 6 million people 80 years ago. I don't think that many people care what happened to a bunch of Jews 80 years ago. People come and go, people die all the time. So what is it about this that makes it different? What is it about this that makes you want to teach? What is it about this that I feel compelled to speak? Candidly, for me at least, it's only one thing. And that is I speak for only one reason. So your students, not necessarily you, because I know you as teachers are totally aware of everything I'm going to say, but so that your students can be sensitized and hopefully avoid that kind of a tragedy occurring to them. That's the only reason I speak. And the bulk of the people with whom I speak are not Jewish, are Christian. And one of the things I love to do is I walk into a room full of students and I say, what do you care what happened to 6 million Jews 80 years ago? It's no skin of your nose. What's your problem? Why are you here? And usually my audiences are very courteous and do not tell me that I'm just being provocative, which is the truth. But the truth is that what most people don't hear and what we survivors don't often tell is that along with the 6 million Jews that died, and let me get a little more specific, in Poland alone, just Poland, 3 million Jews died. One out of every two Jews who died was Polish. But what you don't hear, 3 million Christians died in Poland, same time. The big difference was, and that's of all the 6 million, Jews, Christians, whatever, the big difference was that Christians were usually died most often because they were in a wrong place at a wrong time. They may have done something, or the Nazis were just trying to make a point. The Jews died because they were Jewish and no other reason. Now, that might lead you to question, or certainly might lead your students to question, well, it doesn't happen here. Oh, really? It doesn't? First of all, does it happen at all? And my gosh, in parts of the world, the Muslims are killing the Jews. The Muslims are killing other Muslims. The Jews also don't have a perfect record. And everybody seems to be, and the Christians are doing their fair share. And the point is, every one of us could be subject to these kind of atrocities. And we have to be careful that it does not happen within our society, that it does not happen to our families and to us. That's why we teach students. And I think the work that you folks do, your teachers, is wonderful, phenomenal. And if there's any way I can assist you, I am anxious to do that. By the way, through my book, through my website, and through Charles, Dickens, and Sue, and Brittany, you can find my email, you can find my telephone number. Please do not hesitate to reach me. I will speak to your classes. I will work with your students on their term papers, whatever it is to help. let me go back to my story. 1941, I'm sorry, 1939, we were in Krakow, Poland. That's where I was born, Krakow, which is southwest Poland. And my dad is an insurance executive. My mother's continuing with her career. We have a nanny in the house. We got a maid. We're living well. My dad's parents reasonably well off. My mom's parents are secure. All is going well. September 1, my dad, who was educated in German language and spoke German as well as any Austrian, and perhaps even better than Germans, because he spoke the high German, said to my mother, we have to move. We have to leave Krakow. We got to go to Lvov, which is now called Lviv. It's now Ukraine. And we have to find a more secure place. My mother said, you're crazy. We are here secure. We have a wonderful place to live. We have a terrific circle of friends. Why are you afraid of Germans? Some of our friends are Germans. My mother's worked with Germans, and they've even married into the families. And they go back and forth. And finally, my dad grabs me by the arm and starts dragging me out the door. This is probably September 3rd or 4th. And my mother was just bewildered, and she says in horror, what are you doing? And he responds, if you don't want to go to Lvov with me, then I will take the boy, her only child, and I'm going to go over there. Well, that's more than my mother was going to do. She was not about to give up her child. And so she immediately threw 3 things into a stroller, and she had no time to think. And so she put in the stroller the family album, the family chest of silver, which is the most expensive thing that she thought she could remember, and a fur coat, her fur coat. And of course, this is September, and in Poland in September, you do not need a fur coat. But that's what she did. And we went outside and we started looking for the trains were all bombed out. There are no.
Why don't you just say goodbye?
I'm sorry.
Why don't you just say goodbye to the family?
So this is my coach, my wife. She reminds me vital points because sometimes I forget. Please excuse. My mother also asked my dad if she could say goodbye to her parents. And the only thing in 7 years of marriage, the only thing that he's ever said to her that was unkind was that moment. And he said no. And she was just shocked. She was dumbfounded. And she only had one choice, either go with us or not. So
why was so important?
Lori, please, no more. No more. And so she wanted to say goodbye, but she left without saying goodbye to her parents. And when we walked from Krakow to Lvov, which is the same distance as walking from Miami to Orlando, or where you were Tampa, walking from Tampa maybe more or less to Miami, we couldn't walk it in a very short time. So we would walk, and in the evening, we would literally knock on a stranger's door and ask for shelter and a bit of food. Now, some people were incredibly generous. They gave us a room, a meal, and we spent a pleasant night. Other people less so, and they would just give us some food, or they'll just give us a place to shelter, perhaps in a barn, and occasionally people did send us away. But in bits and pieces, we walked across the 210 miles, and we crossed a river. And that was kind of a thing never to forget, that crossing the river, because it was a flat-bottom boat with a horse and a wagon in the middle and a line of cars line of people standing on each side. And we were pushed across with a man with a pole and pulled by a rope across the river. And so we crossed that river, and it was strange because we just knew that there was something special about that. And what we had no idea what we're doing is that we cross from the Germans occupied part of Poland to the Soviet occupied part of Poland. And by so doing, we gained 20 months of life. Once we walked to Lvov, which is a short distance from the river, my dad got a job. We got an apartment. My grandmother was there. My uncle and aunt were there. And life went back to normal. And I was born for 20 months. Now, when the Nazis and the Soviets had a pact, it was the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. You don't need to remember that. And the pact was a peace pact. It was a pact that really divided in Poland in two parts. One became part of the Soviet Union, the other part became Germany. And the Soviets thought that they had a deal. Well, 20 months later, the Nazis attacked the Soviets. We had no connections or anything with the Soviets, and we had no vital skills, so they would not evacuate us. And within a matter of a couple of days or several brief days of fighting, the Soviets withdrew, and then we came under Nazi occupation. My dad, who got a job being a supervisor, being the project manager of a building of a performance theater building, had his work permit and just continued going to work day after day, and each day with a briefcase. Now, and Mom and I, stayed in the room and almost never went outside, because we knew that outside there was a great deal of danger. The Nazis beat people in the street. They did anything they wanted to, including shooting people right on the street.
How old were you?
Lori, please. And she's right. My wife's right. I was 7 years old. So at any rate, one day we got a 3x5 card, just a little 3x5 card that said you had to leave everything in your apartment. You can't take anything. You can take one small suitcase with personal effects, probably mostly underwear, and you have to go to this other address to settle there. When we walked to the other address, we were dismayed because it was in a very bad part of town. The apartment was nothing to be wanted. And worst of all, there was already another family living in that apartment. And neither family could understand what was happening. And then as we were trying to figure out how to make things work out, a third family moved in. I love when I'm speaking to students, I love to ask the students, what do you think was happening? Some bright students who've read about the Holocaust, so have volunteered that we were actually being resettled into the ghetto. Absolutely correct. The problem was that we never heard the word ghetto. We lived in Poland just as people here live in the United States. You live wherever you wanted to live. There were no districts, there were no boundaries. And so we didn't even understand the concept of ghetto. When we moved there were no guards, there were no barbed wires, there were no walls, nothing. That all came up within weeks afterwards. At any rate, once we're in a ghetto, things got even worse because the Germans were totally untrammeled. They could do anything they wanted to anybody they wanted to. How often, even just for the sport, even just for the enjoyment of beating or shooting somebody. Furthermore, there was little or no food permitted into the ghetto. And let me give you hard information just to give you an example. The average male requires about 2,000 calories for his needs. The average female about 14 or 1,600 calories, I've forgotten. And in the ghetto, we were getting 160 calories, about 1/10 of what a woman needs to survive on. And it was basically a couple of rotten vegetables that were boiled in water. and we had to find our own clean water and water. My dad kept on going to work, and he was very fortunate because he had that briefcase. And so he would find farmers on the street who were trying to sell vegetables or whatever. And on the way home, he would put stuff in his briefcase, and that's how we managed to survive. Other people in the ghetto were not so lucky. Now things were getting worse and worse. And one day on my dad's trip back home, he was approached by somebody who said, "You got a 7-year-old son, don't you?" "Yes, I do." "Well, you better get him out of town because," and by the way, my dad grew up in that town, so he knew a lot of people, as did my mother. And this person said, "You better get him out of town because it's going to be a roundup of children." Well, this was unheard of, unknown. But anyway, out of caution, my dad secured a farmer that would take me, and a railroad worker that would take me to the farmhouse. And this railroad worker and I were walking to the railroad station, where right in front of us, a truck pulled up and closed the street. I could see the Nazis jumping off the back of the truck. And as we turned the other way to go the other way, the other end of the street was also blocked off. So there we were. Shortly thereafter, and I mean talking about seconds, the Nazis spotted me, they grabbed me, and they put me on the truck. And they did not beat me or anything, just physically manhandled me and grabbed me by my clothes and put me on the truck. And the man that was supposed to take me to safety literally disappeared. I have no idea what happened to him. And then, to my horror, I did not see, but I heard, as the Germans fanned into the buildings, people were begging and crying and screaming as their children being wrestled away from them. And the German soldiers came downstairs with usually 2 children in hand, 1 in each hand, put them on a truck with me. And there was 1 or 2 soldiers stayed at the back of the truck to make sure nobody ran away. When the truck was full, they drove us off. And I always thought that we went to a police station, but in fact, we were taken to the Anowska concentration camp, which was at the edge of the ghetto of Lvov. And I stayed in a corral right in the central station or whatever. I was delighted. One second, one moment, please. I watched and I watched, and fortunately I was tall enough to see over the partition, and I was so ecstatic when I saw my dad come because he was going to save me. Well, I stood right next to the partition, and my dad could see me, and I could see him, and our eyes locked, and then he went off, and in his brilliant German language, spoke to the commandant. And then after a brief conversation, I saw my dad turn around without even looking at me, just left what I thought was the police station, was the concentration camp. I thought that at that point I was done, that there was just nothing that could be done. But however, a couple of hours later, my dad came back, several hours later, came back, spoke to the Nazi again, and this time I thought they might have shaken hands or something, and the Nazi spun on his heel and walked off. And my dad looked at me just as I'm looking at each of you now, and just went like that. I knew where that signal was. I knew where the door or the gate was, and I walked out of there. Till this day, I am certain that I'm the only child of those hundreds of children that were there. I'm the only child who survived. And those faces still haunt me. You must understand that in that number of 6 million Jewish people, there was 1.5 million children that were murdered. And I was supposed to be one of them. Shortly thereafter, we went into hiding at first in the ghetto. Our first hiding place was in that, actually, it was out of the ghetto. Our first hiding place was in that theater that my dad was building above the ceiling. And if you look at any theater, above the ceiling is a space between the ceiling and the roof. And that space holds uh, air conditioning ducts, lighting fixtures, all kinds of technical equipment. And there my mother and I sat on a piece of plywood, and we felt that we were safe. And we were, until a maintenance man who saw us, it was clear that he saw us. He went downstairs and we knew it was time to leave. Our next hiding place was in a sub-basement in the factory. And what happened is the two engineers, with my dad's help, rolled a very heavy machine over a scuttle. A scuttle was just an opening. This was just an opening in the floor of the basement. And below the basement was a sub-basement. It was a large room. The initial room we went there was probably 5 or 7 people. As time went on, more people needed shelter. More people showed up, and more people showed up. And these engineers and my dad, when somebody was desperately in need of a safe place, they would have to usher him down there. Well, at the time that about 75 to 85 people were down in that sub-basement, we knew too much food had to go in, too much waste had to come out. There was too much whispering and, frankly, too much heat. And even though what the engineers did, they spread blood, animal blood, on the floor. So when the Nazis brought in their sniffing dogs, once they inhaled that blood, they were useless. And that was the notion of that they couldn't find us that way. But we knew there was just another time, there were just too many people there. And so we decided to hide in another way. And this is what engendered the title of my book. We decided to hide in plain sight. What we meant by that is we got identification cards without showing that we were Jewish. Now, most of you, I would expect, have a driver's license, just as I'm pulling mine out. And in Europe, we had driver's licenses or state issues IDs pretty much as it is here. Except in Europe, in addition to the regular ID, there would be a red J overstamped over that ID. So right as somebody looks at the ID, they see the J, they know that the person is Jewish. So very simply, we got identification papers without the J, and so we could hide in plain sight posing as Christians. And we would move into some people were desperate for money, and so they rent out a house in an apartment, a room in an apartment, or a room in a house, and we'd move into one room and then stay there for a week or two a month, and then move on and on and on. And that worked pretty good. That went pretty well until one day, one landlady got to start worrying, and there she got suspicious. And those of you who have read my book know all this, and please feel free to ask any questions about details. I cut my wife off because she knows all the details, but I want to make sure I left plenty of time for telling the story and for answering the questions. That's why I asked her not to. So at any rate, as soon as people got friendly, and of course the first thing they would ask is, where are you from, what do you do for a living, etc., etc. That was fine. But when they asked about what church you go to, who is your favorite priest, that was dangerous, because if we happened to mention the name of a church that wasn't in function, maybe it was being repaired, or a priest who may have not been in that diocese anymore, or any mistake, every mistake would have been a lethal mistake. Well, this landlady, for one reason or another, which I can't tell you, got suspicious, and she knew that it was a capital crime if to give shelter to a Jewish person. That's it. So she what she should have done, what she could have done is simply say, go away. And we had a small briefcase, small suitcase of stuff. We would have been gone and I'm not exaggerating, 30 seconds to a minute. But she didn't. She just called the police without giving us any warning. And two Polish policemen came very, very nonchalantly, without any real abuse or anything. They said, well, we have a report that you might be Jewish, so we need to take you downtown. Now, my interpretation of that was downtown means some other police station. I was wrong. Years later, I'm talking about decades later, I found the building and found out that it was the SS headquarters. By the way, by that time, we had moved to Warsaw from Lvov in order to gain anonymity, because in Lvov, people knew my parents, and in Warsaw, nobody knew us, so we could pass as being Christian. So we were in Warsaw, and we were taken to the SS headquarters, which is almost directly across the street from Umschlagplatz. And Umschlagplatz was a railroad station abutting the Warsaw Ghetto from where the trains went to Treblinka. And to give you some general idea, each day, anywhere between 1 and 3 trains went to Treblinka. Each train carried 3,000 to 5,000 people. And the euphemism was each person in each train was processed, which means the people, whether they stayed on a train for 2 hours, because that was the traveling time is just 2 hours, but sometimes the trains were put on the side and sit there for a day or two, whether they were there for 2 hours or 3 days, it made no difference. Everybody from the trains had to leave, had to get out. And if they didn't go out voluntarily, then the clubs were used to encourage people to get out. And if they still didn't go out, dogs were sent in, alive or dead, everybody got out of the trains. And so as soon as they got out of the trains, the men and boys and the women and girls were separated. Women went to the left, men to the right. And everybody, anything anybody was holding was put on a pile, allegedly to be given back to the people later, but it was actually redistributed into Germany. And the men and women went into the gas chambers in groups of 200 to 300, 1 to 200. And literally shoulder to shoulder, back to front, they were squeezed into these gas chambers. In Treblinka, nobody survived. Not one person survived of all the people that were taking the trains. The only reason that I'm here able to speak with you is because when we went to the train station, this train station was empty. That only meant one thing, that a train had just left and we just happened to miss a train. And then for the next 2.5 days, we were waiting for a train. We had no idea what was in store for us. We just knew that we were waiting at first with a few people, and then with a few dozens of people, then with a few hundreds of people, then with thousands of people waiting for the next train. And I was 7 years old, and I was frankly starved for a company of other children. And so when I saw other children, more or less my age, I was as happy as could be. And I ran around and bumped into people, as did the other children. And I and a few other kids were such a disruption that the Jewish police and the Polish police and the German police, all three, decided jointly to get us out of there and take us to an orphanage just to get us out of the way. And so we were marched 2 by 2 into an orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I pretty well know which orphanage, although I don't know it by name, but it was the closest to the railroad station, Umschlagplatz. And it was not over the bridge to the small ghetto. So one of these days I'll track it down and I will have a better presentation for you folks. At any rate, in the orphanage, I was there with about 200 or 300 children, and we were having a wonderful time. We had no idea of the horrors that were taking place outside on the streets and in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I was there for probably about 3 weeks, enjoying myself. And if we had bad food or not enough food, I was so accustomed to that, it didn't mean anything to me. And so finally, one day I was pulled aside and I was told there was somebody here, and I went downstairs and there was a total stranger in uniform. Now, mind you, I was terrified of strangers and beyond terrified of anybody in uniform. And so this man said to me, I'm here to take you to your parents. There was no way physically he could have taken me out of that orphanage, none whatsoever. I would have fought him to the death. And so finally he realized that, and he spoke to the adults in the orphanage. And the orphanage or adults whom I trusted completely gently took me by the hand, walked me out of the orphanage, and this must have been distracting, or somehow I was distracted. And next thing I know, the adults from the orphanage were gone, and it was just this man whom I did not like or trust, and myself. And he said, I'm here to take you to your parents, etc. And I just stood there. He said, look, I need you to cooperate with me. Put a cap on my head, put the brim way down. He said, whatever you do, don't look up. Okay. Took my hand, and he said, don't let go of my hand. And lastly, he said something that everybody else is telling me, don't say a word. In Europe, that's a very common thing people say to children. Don't say a word. So we walked, and I had no choice. I had no place, nowhere to go. So we walked down the main street of the Warsaw Ghetto to the guard station. And the guard was on a stool, elevated, and all I could see was a pair of boots. And I couldn't see up above because I was not permitted to look up. So I saw these boots and nothing else. And I heard from up above in a brusque way, who are you? What are you doing here? And my savior said, well, look at me. I'm wearing a trolley car driver's uniform. Now, as a brief aside, trolley car used to go right through the ghetto, Warsaw Ghetto. But the windows were obstructed so you couldn't see out. And nobody could disembark from the trolley car, and nobody could enter the trolley car. So they literally transgressed across the ghetto. And he said, I brought my son to see him, to see these Jewish people. There was a long pause. And I can't imagine what my savior was thinking. But at any rate, the guard from up above said, you must be stupid. It's almost curfew. And at curfew, which was more or less sundown when it got dark, at curfew, the patrols that patrol the streets shoot on sight. Run home and pray you can get home, referring to his home, before the patrol shoots you. And that's the way I was snuck out of the Warsaw Ghetto. He was good to his word. He delivered me to my parents, and then he disappeared. This was in 1943. It might have been 42. Yes, it was 42. I have been hoping to find, if not that man, then his survivors and people in his family. I have never been able to track that man down. The people rarely gave their real names and certainly never gave their addresses. So there was no way of tracking him down. The only way I can say thank you to him, and I do that every opportunity I have, is to publicly say thank you. There were unbelievably wonderful people in the middle of this horrible time who took their lives in their hands, risked their lives, and in my case, I'm here as a result of that. So I've been saved multiple times. So deliver me to my parents, and we continue to hide in plain sight. Well, something really wonderful and strange happened after that. My dad, as I mentioned to you, spoke brilliant German, and he did something else which I've forgotten to tell you. If my wife was here, she would have coached me. But at any rate, he went to a physician. This was right just about the time we snuck out of the ghetto, Lvov ghetto. Went to a physician. He said, "See this? This is my death warrant." Because Nazis always show Jews with a big bulbous nose. And he said, "I need a rhinoplasty, a nose job." And my dad happened to be lucky enough to have a real honker of a nose. I mean, this was a real horn of a nose. So the doctor said, I understand what you're saying. I would love to help you, but I just can't, because Jews are not permitted to be taken to any hospital, and they were not even permitted to be taken to a park. So I can't. And my father said, "You have your little black bag and do it at home." And he told my dad, he has no assistant, he has no anesthetic, it's an impossibility. And my dad persisted, and finally he used his ACE card. He said, "Doctor," actually they spoke by first names. He said, "I have a 7-year-old son. And if you don't try," and I understand that there's no assurances, but if you don't try, you will know for the rest of your life that a 7-year-old son died because you refused to try." Well, this doctor was a reasonable, good person. And even though he knew that medically this was contraindicated, he said, "Okay, come to my house. I'll do the best I can, but no assurances." And that night, my dad went to his house. His sole anesthetic was a half a bottle of vodka. He chug-a-lugged it down and then proceeded to hand tools to the physician, because the physician only had 2 hands, and sometimes he needed a third tool when he needed it. And you'd be amazed what you can do if your life is at stake. At any rate, the rhinoplasty was a brilliant success and a total failure. Cosmetically, it was a total failure. But when it was all finished and it healed, which, by the way, facial tissue heals very quickly. When it healed, my dad, instead of looking like he had this big honker on his face, had a nose that looked very much like a pugilist boxer. You know, the boxer's noses have kind of collapsed right here and they spread down there. My dad went to his grave at the age of 80 with that nose. And then my dad did one more thing. He went into the bathroom like a brunette. He came out a blonde. If women can dye their hair, why couldn't he? And so for the rest of the war, he had this new face, he had this blonde hair, and when he got tired of bleaching his hair, what he would do is just shave it and bleach the stubs. And then with his brilliant German language, he would hang around with Nazis. And while so doing, and having beer, this Nazi was complaining, moaning and groaning, saying, "I have this 2-room suite of offices in Warsaw, and my company doesn't need the space anymore, and I'm just paying rent every month for nothing." And without showing signs of joy, of glee, my father sort of casually said, "Well, I have a small factory. I think I can find a way to use that space." And for the next 2 years, that was the hiding place for my mother and I. Where are they not going to look for Jews? We were in a Nazi headquarters building, the tallest building in Poland, the second tallest building in Europe. On the top 2 floors was a headquarters for the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, not German Air Force throughout Poland, and there was a 24/7 operation. So there were always people in the building, and so the building was heated, and so it was a perfect hiding place. Now the mother and I would stay in a closet off a private office. He had basically the suite of offices was a large open space for people to work, and then a private office next to it, and then a closet for supplies. We were the only supplies that were there. And people would come in, maintenance people, security people, they would see this large vacant office. Most of them close the door and leave. Every once in a while, not very often, somebody would go in, check the private office, same thing, they would leave. In 2 years' time, nobody once looked in the closet. And so we felt totally safe. By that time, we already heard that the Soviets are coming, and we thought we were in a good place. Well, there is no good news in the wartime. At any rate, what happened was the Polish resistance also heard that the Soviets are coming. They wanted to liberate their own capital city and welcome the Soviets, because the Soviets were considered the allies and friends, etc. And everybody was happy to see them coming. And so what they did is they rose up and literally drove the Nazis out of Warsaw. But the Soviets did not advance. And so actually they retreated about 10 miles. The Nazis understood what they were doing, and they were enabling the Nazis to wipe out the Polish resistance. And that's what they did. But we were extremely lucky because our building happened to be in the epicenter of the Polish resistance. So the Nazis never really conquered our space. The Poles gave up, and we were the last segment of Warsaw to come under German domination. Meanwhile, during the fighting, the largest artillery shell ever produced, even to this day, the Germans had it on a railroad car, and they lobbed these shells into Warsaw, and one hit our building and landed in the basement. We were forced to come out of our hiding place into the bomb shelter in the basement, because when the only person that opened our closet door was an air raid warden. And when he didn't want to listen to anything we had to say. He said, "We got to go down the basement," which we did. And we knew that shell could explode any time. We went to another bomb shelter under sniper fire, and there, as if everything else was not special, there something extraordinary happened to me, because for the first time in years, my mother and I were separated. They put my mother in a space that actually turned out to be a coal bin, and I sat with the general population. And I couldn't understand, but my mother knew of my fear, and she said, "Don't worry about it, everything's fine, you'll be fine." And every once in a while, she would speak from across the sheet, saying, "I'll be fine." Well, by that time, all the livestock was removed by the Nazis for food, and even cats and dogs were eaten by the Polish people. There were no more Jews left as far as anybody knew. And I heard what I thought was a really weird sound, because I heard what I thought was a screech by a cat. And I couldn't understand how there could be a cat that was still alive. Well, I was mistaken. That was no cat. That was my baby brother that had been born. His name was Andrew, and his birth weight was less than 2 pounds, and he was minuscule. I mean, he could easily fit on the palm of my hand. And my mother was without milk because of malnutrition. There were no women breastfeeding. There were no animals, so this child had to die. Well, one doctor said, "If you feel that you have to do something with this child, give him some sugar water." That was a bizarre statement, because we hadn't seen sugar for 2 years. At any rate, somebody was hoarding sugar. the bag showed up, and we started mixing with water. And much to my surprise, all we could give him, by the way, is 1 teaspoon of sugar water every half hour. And much to my surprise, a day went by, 2 days went by, he didn't die. He literally refused to die. After about a week or 10 days of this, the Nazis regained control of Poland, of Warsaw, and we had to go through a checkpoint where we had no current papers, and at any checkpoint where they would have found us, if we were lucky, would have gotten shot on the spot. More likely would have been taken to a concentration camp and there to die almost immediately. But the physician wanted to save this miraculous baby who would not die. Really, people all around us were dying. So this baby was a special thing. Put us on a hospital train, and we thought we were going to Germany, but on a hospital train. And Dad, like a German, jumped on a train later on, because Germans could do anything they want to. He just jumped on a train later on. And Mom had this baby in her hands, face bandaged up, and I just sat with my head down next to her. And that way we arrived in Krakow, which was the very place where we started 4 years ago, 4 years before. And make a long story short, we got off the train. We had no idea where to go, what to do. And all of a sudden, we were surrounded by a group of large men who whisked us off without telling us where we're going, what was happening. They whisked us off, and we were actually taken into a Polish resistance safe house. And we stayed there for 3 months, really very uncomfortable, because we're coming and going in that house. We were terrified that we would be discovered, both by the Poles, because they didn't know we were Jewish, and by the Germans, because they didn't know we were there. And about 3 months later, 3.5 months later, we were liberated. And essentially, that is the story of my Holocaust, except for a low epilogue. And that is, liberation is not what people think. It's not joyous. It's not celebratory. Well, what happened was people started venturing out, trying to figure out, where are we going to sleep tonight? Where's the next meal coming from? What's happening here? And that really is liberation. But the Soviets came in and started creating order. We thought they were allies, etc. But I'll make this part very brief. They weren't. They wanted to dominate Poland, which they did for 60 years or some long number of years, until I think 89, or 50 years. At any rate, my dad, because of the work he did during the German occupation, my dad, all he was trying to do is make money to buy food with. And he actually helped to sell false identification papers from the same source as we were getting ours. And what he did not know, had no idea, that was an underground activity. So when the Polish government came into existence, and they knew that he had administrative experience with the insurance companies before, and that he worked for the underground, they gave him a responsible position for which he had to travel and bring insurance companies into Poland so that the economy could regenerate. And he did that for 4 or 5 times, to Sweden, to Switzerland, to England. And he came up on the Soviet radar. And one night, they always came between 2 and 4 in the morning. And you knew you got that kind of knock between 2 and 4 in the morning. You knew what it was. Because my dad was an official, they gave him the honor of being dressed. They didn't drag him off in their pajamas. He went in his business suit with necktie, etc. And he went to prison, and subsequently was sent to Siberia. And my mother put my 20-month-old baby brother on my back and said, walk to Israel. Actually, walk to Palestine. There was no Israel. I got stuck in a DP camp in Baden, which is 40 miles south of Vienna. And meanwhile, my dad escaped from prison, joined my mother, and they started looking for us. By that time, I was an expert in evasion. Every DP camp I went into, I changed my name. So they had to find us because we were a comparative rarity. Two kids, ages 11 and 2, traveling alone. That was a pretty rare thing. And so that's how they finally found us. We went to Paris, and in January 11th, 1947, we came to the United States. And I'm here to answer any questions.
Your story is incredible.
I
I've
don't,
heard it
sometimes I
before,
don't believe
and I've read it, and I'm still in awe of your ability to hide when you were such a little kid, to not speak and to not look up and to survive.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, survival.
Right. Does anybody have any questions?
Or comments? If not, I think, Charles, it's your turn.
I think, Charles, it is your turn.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I'll actually ask Alan a question because, again, just hearing this story, I mean, I think I said this to you before, Alan, it feels so much like a movie. And it's one of those things where everything that happened to you and that happened to your family, it's just like an adventure movie. But yet it's so mind-bending, like the surgery on your dad's nose, like if you went to a movie producer and said this is what's going to happen, they would say, okay, take a step back, that's a hat on a hat. That's too much. And the fact that not only your family survived all that, but you're here today talking about it is just so incredible. So I guess my question really is, was there ever a time you or your family felt the most in danger, like you thought it was the end of the road, or was it just kind of like you just kept going and kept persevering?
I think, well, my instinct, my knee jerk, was to say every day was the end of the road. But our notion of long-term planning is to survive that day. But I must admit to you, I think looking at it from my mother's point of view, probably the day that we were on the Umschlagplatz, the railroad station, she must have known that was truly the end of the road. When I was taken to the concentration camp in Lvov, Poland, I was probably within 2 hours of being shot. So, I mean, technically those were the end of the road, but that's not the way it felt. Each moment of each day, I was just trying to survive that moment. So that's probably a lousy answer to your question, to a good question.
No, I appreciate that so much. And then just a follow up, just on the opposite end of the spectrum, what was the feeling of liberation, and then coming to America? What was that experience?
I must tell you, just something that amuses me. Mind you, our two uncles, my dad had two brothers here, sent us tickets to fly to the United States on American Airlines. And so I was sitting on, my mom and dad were sitting behind me, and I was sitting on the aisle. There was some person next to me to the right. And here I've been in Europe during the war, during the Soviet times, afterwards, etc. I've seen pretty good swath of Europe, but everywhere there it was dark. There was no electrical generation except for the absolute minimal necessary amounts, and much of Europe was still using candles. So anyway, I'm sitting in the airplane. I can still tell you, on the right side, the aisle seat, and I just inadvertently look out the window, and the window is white. Now, this is middle of the night. This is probably 11 o'clock at night. The window is white. I mean, this is my perception. Now, how can that be? So I drape across this poor person, really disregarding their space, their rights. And I'm looking out the window, couldn't figure it out. And we land, and it was the lights over Manhattan, because the United States already resumed its electrification. And I love to say, when I came to Europe, from Europe to the United States, I came into the light. And I feel that way. Because mind you, I was a kid, never went to a day of school, and was educated by these wonderful, wonderful teachers. And my life in the United States has been wonderful, been terrific. Great. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Alan. And before I get started, I just want to give a little bit more time in case anyone else did have a question that they thought of for you, because your story is absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it very much. Don't forget to pass it on. That's the key. Do not forget to pass it on for your children's sake.
Absolutely. I guess we.
You can, I don't see any other questions. I see a couple of, we can bring up, why don't you go ahead and do your presentation, Charles, and then we will circle back.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Of course, I think Alan is the definition of a tough act to follow. Just incredible, and thank you so much for sharing your story. My name is Charles Dickens. I'm with the Florida Holocaust Museum. I'm an assistant educator there. Alan has been a speaker with us for, gosh, what's it been, Alan, about 6 or 7 years?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but this is the first time we've seen each other in quite a long time. So again, this was a really great, really great opportunity for me as well. So again, I'm in awe. So again, I can't thank Alan enough, and thank you all for being here. So I'm just here to share with you some of the educational resources we have at the museum. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit the museum, feel free to drop it in the chat and let me know. And if you haven't, you may not be aware, but we are closed for now for renovation. We actually brought in a Danish rescue boat named Thor, which is now going to be part of our permanent exhibition. If you've ever visited the museum, you know that we have the boxcar, which we are pretty sure was used during the Holocaust, and now we have a rescue boat next to that. So again, we have a very good, relatively speaking, we have two opposite ends of the spectrum there, which again we hope will bring discussion for students. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if everyone can see it. Are we good?
Yes.
Perfect. So the first thing I want to share is our mission statement, which is the Florida Holocaust Museum honors the memory of millions of innocent men, women, and children who suffered or died in the Holocaust. The museum is dedicated to teaching the members of all races and cultures the inherent worth and dignity of human life in order to prevent future genocides. We do our best to bring in survivors for every tour, survivors or children of survivors, to share their story like Alan, or, any story, any testimony, of course, is so important for our museum. And we really value, teaching students 6 million Jewish people died in the Holocaust is, again, it's mind bending. You know, you can't, especially students, they may have a hard time grasping that. But hearing stories, hearing individual stories, that's what we like to focus on, because again, it's much easier to hear an individual story than to try to think of the number 6 million. So that is part of our focus at the museum. This is, of course, the Florida statute for Holocaust education. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. So we definitely have all of our resources to offer, education material, uh, to help with any teaching material that you have as well. So this is the Florida statute. If you do need it, if you don't have that actively available or readily available, of course, please let me know. Again, I'll drop my email address in the chat so you can have it, so you can reach out at any time. So one of the things we're most proud of at the museum, and of course we're proud of our entire educational resources, but we do have our teaching trunks that are physical trunks that we send to schools, not only statewide, but nationwide. I've sent them as far north as New York and as far west as the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington State. So we do offer them to any education professional in need. You can see the different grades that we offer. In Florida, Holocaust education in kind begins in 5th grade. So younger grades, we have good citizen trunks. As you can see, 1st and 2nd grade, different and the same, focusing on our differences, but are also what makes us the same. Our 3rd and 4th grade trunk would focus on creating community, again, being those good citizens. And then, of course, starting in 5th grade, it's the beginning of Holocaust studies. So we do cater each trunk to each appropriate grade level, but also we can make trunks for your grade level. If there's titles that you're interested in, or other materials, if there's one book maybe that you would want to replace, or if there's posters that you want to have, we can definitely cater to requests. Again, of course, it's just a matter of availability. And these trunks are loaned out for up to 6 weeks. But we're always open if you need, extensions on them. If your students are really utilizing the material, of course, we can always extend that as well. So I ship out every trunk. Like I said, I will make sure to have my contact information at the end of this. So if you're interested in that, they do weigh 145 pounds, the heaviest trunks. If you're middle or high school teachers, they are very, very heavy. But again, shipping is free. Their usage is free. There's no cost to you or your school. So again, please feel free to reach out. And then we have our free virtual library as well. So if you don't want that cumbersome, heavy trunk, we do offer a lot of ebooks and audiobooks, especially along with the trunks. If you do request a trunk, you do get logins for every student and every teacher, every educator. So it's through Libby. You just log in. If you've ever used Libby before, it's an incredible resource that libraries use. And so we have our own version of that. And like I said, most of the titles are along with the physical trunks as well, parallel to the trunk titles. So we are currently closed, like I mentioned. We are hoping for a summer reopening. We don't have a specific date. But we are offering virtual tours, which again, I would be booking for you. The virtual tour is a virtual recreation of our permanent exhibit on the 1st floor. So we do have docents who would still be narrating the tour, taking questions, explaining each exhibit. The silver lining with the virtual tour, even though it's not, in person at the museum, you can't physically see, or you're not in person at the museum to see the artifacts, even though the artifacts are still on the virtual tour. The nice thing is, there's a little bit more of interactivity as well. There's interactive timelines, there's videos featuring testimony, from survivors and again, their children. And again, like I said, it's docent led, it's free. There'd be no cost to your school. All of these things that we're offering in the virtual realm are free. So again, if you would like to do a virtual tour until we reopen, again, please let me know. And of course, the virtual tours will be available if you're out of the area and you can't come to the museum. Again, we'd be more than happy to offer that to anyone. This is our amazing across generations conversations with survivors and their descendants speaker. Of course, this is where someone like Allan would be able to speak to your class. We do have, of course, locally in the Tampa Bay area, we do have speakers that can come to your class as well. But again, it's always available via Zoom. So you can reach out to us if there's anything that you're teaching that, again, you would like that personal testimony, which again, we focus on because it's so important to hear those individual stories. Again, having a speaker would be absolutely wonderful. And most students, really, like I said, they focusing on the individual stories and hearing survivors and their children. Students do get a lot out of that. Next, we have a free curriculum portal for educators. This is starting to get a little outside of my umbrella. My teammates would be assisting on this end of it. But again, we do have the free curriculum as well. So it just supplements your Holocaust education. The museum would, have this guide for you to sort of, to look at, the first person education and, getting those survivor stories and everything that the museum has to offer. Like I said, the curriculum itself, usually I'm not the one sending that, so I don't have as much information. But again, of course, please feel free to reach out at any time and I will definitely get you pointed in the right direction. Again, we have our museum guide for educators. That's also, that's also supplementing the curriculum. And this is just some images that we have in our study guide. And then we have our teacher training and student program. So again, my colleague, Jada, who's actually in Poland right now with our director of education, Ursula, they schedule a lot of teacher trainings. Again, through Zoom for now, but we do have a lot of on-hand teacher trainings at the museum. Once we reopen, we'll definitely be offering that. So you just need to register. The registration link is always on the website. And of course, if you do sign up to be on an email mailing list, you'll always have access to those dates as well. And we also have a library of survivor testimony videos. So if you can't get a speaker in person or the timing just isn't quite right, we always have on-demand videos as well. So they're not as interactive, of course, because they're pre-recorded, but you still would be getting that first-person perspective of their testimony. And that's always available on our website as well. And lastly, you can search the Florida Holocaust Museum collections. As you can see, as an example, this is a flag donated by a survivor, Jacqueline Albin. So anything that is an artifact in the museum, if you visit us or you go through a tour and you want to research more, we do offer this on our website as well. So you can search any artifact that we have in our collection. You'll be able to get a virtual version of that. And this is the next teacher training that we have. There's a QR code. It's using photographs to teach about the Holocaust. Like I said, my colleague is going to be doing that. So I don't have all the information on the details of this training. But like I said, I can definitely get you pointed in the right direction if you are interested in attending that. I know I kind of flew through this. I apologize, but I know that we're getting a little short on time. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. And like I said, I will be putting my information in the Zoom chat as well, so, if you'd like to reach out. But if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to field them.
Charles, just a point, when you put your contact information in the chat, can you also put the museum's website?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
And do we have any questions or anything I can answer about the museum or construction?
May I share a thought or two?
Absolutely.
Charles, when you were speaking, what I frequently try to say is that this was not, the Holocaust was a Jewish event, but this was not solely a Jewish event, because remember, when 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe, 60 to 80 million people died. Furthermore, every concentration camp except for 5, the inmates of each concentration camp initially were not Jewish. So, when I like to say, when evil turns loose, when evil gets loose, none of us is safe. No matter what faith, what gender, what religion, what race, none of us is safe. So I just wanted to share that. And I hope that the youngsters listening from you teachers will understand that.
Thank you so much, Alan. And that is a very important point as well. Like Alan said, the museum defines the Holocaust as the systemic murder of 6 million Jews, but we also do point out that there were other victim groups of the Nazi regime, and we do teach that as well as part of the tour and as part of our our classroom materials. So, Alan, thank you for saying that, because that is an important point. And yeah, I mean, again, we can definitely have any lesson on those other victims as well, as the Jewish victims. So again, thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Let's try that on unmute. There is a question asking if the museum, if there'll still be virtual things when the museum reopens.
Absolutely, yes. When the museum reopens, we've actually had our virtual tour for about 5 years, since since we had our COVID years. So we've had that virtual tour open since then. Again, we welcome any educator, statewide or of course nationwide. We'd be more than happy to do virtual tours and offer those virtual resources no matter where you're located.
That is great. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Jodi.
You're welcome. I'm going to apologize in case when I talk to my computer, my cats think I'm talking to them and they make all kinds of weird noises. So hopefully that will not happen. I am going to also share my screen and kind of give you, let's see if I can do this. There we go. I'm going to give you kind of a little overview of NIE real quick, and then we're going to talk about Bearing Witness, which is our latest and greatest NIE publication. So for those of you who are new to NIE, this is our website. We can all see this, right? Is my screen sharing? Okay, good. For any information you need about NIE, just go to tampabay.com/NIE. And we have lots of materials on there for you. I am going to, I did this for Sue. This is Samantha, and she always joins us for Zoom calls and team calls. So I used her picture to introduce myself. Like I said, I am the manager of the Tampa Bay Times newspaper and education program. I've been doing curriculum for newspaper and education since 2000. I was a teacher back in the 1990s. I started when I was 2, so that's why it's hard to tell how old I am. And I'm also currently an adjunct at St. Leo University in Hillsborough Community College. I bring that up just to let you know that I do have some experience in the classroom. And I have, whenever Sue and I put together educational materials, we try to make sure that we cover as many subject bases as we can. So basically, NIE is a cooperative effort between schools and the newspaper to promote the use of newspapers as an educational resource. So the idea is to get your students reading, and we want them to read primary sources, and we want them to read secondary sources, and we want them to read informational text. So the idea is that once you get students using the newspaper in your classroom, it will get students to start reading every day. And of course, reading the newspaper is a great way for students to see current events, as well as learning about how the lessons that you're teaching them will relate to what's going on in the world today. You all know what informational text is, so I'm going to skip this. Primary sources, we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail in a few minutes. Primary sources and secondary sources are both part of the standards, and they are both listed. They are both used in the newspaper and in our curriculum supplements. For informational text, the newspaper is not just words. It's important to remember that there are letters in there, there are images, there are cartoons, there are photographs, there are advertisements. As Charles pointed out, one of the sessions that they're going to be doing is talking about teaching the Holocaust through photos, which is something that we're going to explore in a second as well. So this is our latest publication. It's called Bearing Witness, an exploration of the Holocaust through primary sources. I am going to show you that I have a QR code for you to, if you want to download the publication. I also have the direct link on here. I believe, and I'm not sure how quickly, but we will be posting the PowerPoint for you on our website so that you'll have this information handy. We had so much information to put in this publication, which is a 20-page newspaper tabloid style publication, that we also did a very long teacher guide. So the teacher guide is also available for you free of charge to download. It is a 8.5 by 11, and it has all kinds of things in it that we couldn't fit in the teacher guide, including interpreting political cartoons, more newspaper activities, some research activities to go into more depth. Sorry, there goes the cat. So basically, this is just an outline of what's in Bearing Witness. It is a 20-page publication, as I mentioned. The beginning of it is depicting the details, some of the details of the Holocaust. And then I have basically interviewed survivors as well as survivors' children and grandchildren to tell you their stories. The purpose of the publication is to provide you with a new educational resource that will enhance Holocaust education. As you know, as Charles brought up, grades 5 through 12, it is mandated that you teach Holocaust education. And we thought the best way to get the Holocaust story out there is through the survivors and through their children and through their grandchildren. Charles just showed you this. You all know the statute. You all know that it's required curriculum. So I'm not going to go through all that with you. Here are the Florida standards for the publication. There are a lot of them, lots of social studies and lots of best standards. So one of the other reasons that we suggest teaching the Holocaust, and again, I'm not going to go into all these numbers for you, but anti-Semitism has made an increase in its presence. And these are just some statistics that we have compiled from the Anti-Defamation League. Okay, so this is an example of page, and I'm going to just peek at my notes real quick here. This is an example of page, I believe, 4. Oops, my notes are completely out of order. I didn't write down what page it was. Basically, at the beginning of the publication shows you information, shows you primary sources in the form of political cartoons, newspaper clippings, and photographs, and talks a little bit about the beginning of the Nuremberg race laws, what anti-Semitism is, and a little bit about what the Holocaust itself is. And the Hebrew word for that is Shoah, which is listed, which is the information you're seeing on the bottom of the screen. We also have lots of photos within the publication, as well as in the teacher guide. The idea is to get students to analyze photos so that they not only understand what is being depicted, but to understand the things behind the photos as well. We all know that students get their news from social media. Social media is a lot of photos, and students often can be fooled by what's going on. It's important when you're talking about the Holocaust to remember that when the camps were freed, people went in, soldiers went in and took these photographs as a artifact to show what was really going on at the time. This is the boxcar that Charles referred to that is in the Holocaust Museum. This is actually boxcar 1130695, and it rests on the original tracks from the Treblinka Killing Center in the Holocaust Museum. It's one of the things that's interesting to me when you examine this picture is to notice how closed off the car is. Alan was telling you how many people were crammed into these cars. There was no room to move. There was no, obviously there's no windows, there's just a door. So when you close the door, there's no flow of air. A lot of times there was no place for people to sit down. These are kind of things that you can ask your students to examine and get them to look, to maybe understand a little bit more about the situation at the time. This is a photo from Kristallnacht. One of the people that I spoke to, one of the survivors' children that I spoke to, was explaining to me that his mother owned a store that was, his mother and father owned a store that was similar to this. And when the next day, when she was trying to clean up the broken glass and the debris that was left from the bombings and the fire bombs and the riotings and the lootings, she said the soldiers were standing in the street and they would just basically kick the dustpan out of her hand. So this is, in my view, this is a very impactful photo. A lot of the photos that we used in the publication are tell a story on their own without necessarily the rest of the information, without somebody necessarily talking about it. But in this particular photo, we do have a second generation person speaking about the experience. This is a political cartoon that I am just going to mention that in the teacher guide, we have a bunch of political cartoons. Basically, you would ask the students what they are looking at and what they think is going on. One of the things that's interesting about this is the title, of course. And I was at a conference this past weekend where they were talking about primary source documents and talking about the fact that students often don't look at all of the text, especially when you're talking about cartoons. They don't look at the title, they don't look at the dialogue, they just kind of look at the picture and try to interpret what's going on. This is another example of a page from Bearing Witness. I wanted to point out that there is a timeline that goes through the entire publication. It starts at the beginning and then ends, I think it ends probably pretty close to page 20, where we're up, or probably close to page 19, I should say, examining all of the details. It's important to remember that the Holocaust didn't just happen overnight. This was a well thought out plan by the Nazi government, and the information in the timeline will support that. I just said that. It was a systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators. Sorry about that. It's important for students to know that it didn't happen overnight. It's important for students to know that there were signs that people, some signs people ignored, but other signs that things happened that people couldn't do anything about. One of the things we talk about when we're analyzing text is looking at the social, economic, political, and ethical implications. And of course, there's a lot of that to unpack when you're talking about the Holocaust. This is just more photo, just to show you that there's more photos. There's also going beyond the text activities. And those activities are also, you can't see this because it's kind of cut off on the bottom, but they are also geared to the full Florida state standards. This is another example of showing you primary source documents. Viola Barris was in Auschwitz, and one of the images here shows the tattoo that she had. There's also a very important picture on this page showing her family now, which her son, who was another person I interviewed, spoke of the fact that this is proof that Hitler's plans did not come to fruition because of the fact that families there are generations and generations of survivors today. There's also an artifact in the top corner showing one of the stars that Jews were forced to wear. There's another one here. There's another star, and there's a child's armband that is showing at the top of the page. So basically, the publication focuses on the survivors' stories, the artifacts that they had available, and the photos. One of the people that I spoke to was Sydney Finkel, who has also written a book. And we are, when we are done with the webinar, we will have a little drawing. I think we have 4 or 5 copies of the book that we will do. We have 5, thank you. So we have 5 copies of the books that we will be doing a drawing. So if your name wasn't right on the on your information that is giving on the Zoom call, on the Zoom presentation, please make sure that you have the name that you registered under in the chat. I hope that made sense. This is just more examples of photos. This is an aerial view of Auschwitz. This is the cover of Allan J. Hall's book. It is called Hiding in Plain Sight. I sent you all the link for that when I sent you the information for this meeting, but I will send it out to you again. Also, you can just scan the QR code. The book is very intriguing. It goes into a little bit more detail in his story, and it's definitely something that you should download and read, I would say, as soon as possible. This is another example of one of the docents at the Holocaust Museum. This is we did a workshop at in Hillsborough County with this second generation survivor, and that information is posted on our the video for that is posted on our website. that is available for you as well if you're looking for more original stories. And what was I going to, oh, I was also going to mention that there are some more books that have been written by survivors and their children. Judy Luden has written one as well. That information is in the teacher guide for you. And then I'm going to give some praise here to Mike Eigel. He is the board chair of the Florida Holocaust Museum. He is a third generation survivor, and his story is his grandparents' story is very intriguing, as is his I guess it would be his great aunt story. Her name is Tony. And we interviewed Tony and another Holocaust survivor for another tab that we have that's called Genocide in the 20th and 21st Centuries. This publication, and I'm sorry that I'm switching from tab to publication. That's my going from education to newspaper talk. A tab is simply a tabloid publication. It's on newsprint, and it opens up. It reads like a book, but it reads like a tabloid. So this publication focuses on genocide. We started with the Armenian genocide, and we go all the way through to what is going on in Africa. I spoke to 2 Holocaust survivors, and I spoke to survivors from a survivor from Bosnia and a survivor from Rwanda. Their stories are very intriguing. This is a QR code for that publication. Both Tony's story and Mary's are very, very intriguing, and your students will get a lot of information from them if you want to include those in your lessons. Okay, so we're back to our website. This is just a view of what the beginning of our website looks like. If you are a teacher anywhere in the state of Florida, you can get copies, you can get a subscription to the e-edition online for free from us for use in your classroom. To do that, if you are in the Tampa Bay area, which I think most of you who registered are, basically you just go to our website and click register here, and you can sign up to get newspapers in print as well as in the digital format. If you are outside of the Tampa Bay area, we cannot send you print copies, but we can send you the digital edition. The digital edition of the newspaper is an exact replica of the newspaper. So it is, and it comes out 7 days a week. We only print twice a week. So if you are interested in using the newspaper and keeping news and current events in your classroom, this is a great way to do it. Again, there's no charge to you. There's no charge to your schools. We also have some really great resources on our website. So when you get a chance, if you want to explore, that would be great. We have some free lessons that update every week that are in a variety of different styles of informational text. We have cartoons in the classroom. We have news videos. We have use the news activities, which are broken up by elementary, middle, and secondary. So there's lots and lots of information on here for you to use. And again, these are updated. Usually they're updated everything except Pulse of the Planet and the NASA information and the special report are updated weekly. Okay, so I'm going to go back for a minute before I get into that. So for those of you who are not using the times in your classroom right now, again, all you have to do is go back and sign up. I keep going the wrong way, sorry. Sign up. If you are using the times in the classroom and you have access to the digital edition, you would access it by going to this website and then clicking log in. And then you and your students can use the times in the classroom. You can use it at home. You can use it in the media center. They can use it for research. they can use it for all kinds of things. I know that was very fast, but I wanted to make sure that we had a little time left if anybody has any questions. I noticed there were a couple in the chat. One of the other things that we have is this, oops, now I'm going the wrong way again. One of the other things that we have is a teacher survey for you to fill out, to let us know your how we did on the webinar. This publication, and Sue, you might have to correct me here if I am wrong in my documentation here, but this publication and all of its associated parts are sponsored in part by the Florida Commission on Holocaust Education. Did I say that right?
Sure.
Okay. And we got a grant from them to produce this information. So we like to give them feedback. So there's a survey here for you to fill out for the webinar. And then we also are going to ask you if you use the publication in your classroom, there's another survey that I will be sending information out about via email as well. And this is my contact information. If you need any information about getting copies of the publications, or if you need, if you didn't quite get the information that Charles put down, or if you want more information about Allan Hall's book, or how to get in touch with him because he said that his information is widely available, please feel free to email me. I check email more often than I check phone messages, but you can also call. And we also have a Facebook page that we like to post information that's coming up. So the anniversary of Kristallnacht is January 27th. Is that right, Sue? Yes. And we've been posting some information about the anniversary, the remembrance, I should say. Anniversary makes it sound too positive. Posting information about that so that you can share information with your students from us, as well as information that I've seen posted on the Holocaust Museum site. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to stop sharing and go to chat. Oh, I did want to answer there was one question that somebody asked about Holocaust reading. And one of the things I just want to point out is that the Holocaust Museum, as well as the material in the teacher guide, all of that material is nonfiction informational text. I don't believe that the Holocaust, and I could be wrong, so Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the Florida Holocaust Museum has fictional works in their teacher trunks. Do they?
No, that's absolutely correct when it comes to the specific grade level for Holocaust education.
Okay, you do recommend that students read nonfiction works as opposed to
Yes, absolutely.
And the book that and I don't know why I'm blanking on the title, but the book that we gave away at the workshop and that we're giving away through a random drawing to for this webinar is appropriate for students and is in the Holocaust trunk.
Yes, are you referencing Sevic?
Yes.
Yes, The Boy Who Lived. Sevic, The Boy Who Lived.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For some reason I was blanking on the title of the book.
Yeah, no, I absolutely.
Let's see, what other questions do we have?
While you're looking through the chat, I just want to bring up another book that I think is worth looking at. This, I don't know if it's going to let me, there, well, it let me post it. It is a work of fiction. It's only a couple years old. It won the Booker Prize. This book is called Prophet Song, and it's by an author called Paul Lynch. It is not about the Holocaust. It is about modern day Ireland and a fictional universe in which modern day Ireland undergoes a very slow, gradual slide into fascism. And it's an excellent depiction of how people can not think that things are going to get bad. I know that many people come up with questions like, well, why didn't people just leave? Why didn't they should have known things were going to get really bad, and why didn't they just leave? And as it's not that simple. And in addition to the survivor stories, this particular novel takes that narrative and plops it down in 1990s Ireland or 2000 Ireland, which is a very interesting way of looking at the problem. It is an adult book, so I wouldn't recommend it for anyone under high school, but it is a very interesting juxtaposition against the real narratives.
And one of the survivors that I spoke to, her name is Terry Rabinowitz. She actually explains why they didn't leave when, because she said people ask that question all the time. And she said that it wasn't possible to leave, but her story goes into that in a little more detail. And I don't see any more questions. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat, Sue.
Yeah, so just another reminder, please take a moment just to go to that webinar survey and fill it out. I think it's less than 10 questions. And if you do use the publication in your classroom, please again do fill out a survey and just let us know what you liked and what you liked about it, what you think could be done better in the next one. You can take the survey anonymously. But if you choose to share your email, you'll be entered into a drawing for a $25 restaurant gift certificate.
And just before I noticed that we have a hand up, but I have a quick point that I forgot to mention. We do have print copies of Bearing Witness available for you. If you are interested in getting print copies, we sent them out to middle and high schools, but there were limited copies. So if you're looking for more copies, just email me. Again, my email is jpushkin@tampabay.com. And I will be happy to try to get some to you. Colette, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. I have two questions. One is about the teaching trunks. Are those still available even though the museum is under construction?
Yes, absolutely.
And so we just fill out the form online like normal?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm really interested in information on maybe teaching propaganda, and I don't really know. I haven't wrapped my mind around that quite yet because I do teach little kids. I teach fourth graders. But I'm just really interested in thinking about that and looking into that. And I'm wondering if there's resources to help with that.
That is a great question. I'm going to let Charles go first.
So within the teaching trunks, again, because at the fourth grade level, it's kind of, dipping into the waters a little bit on Holocaust education, but again, it's not a focus of the trunks at that age level. There are some materials on, like what propaganda means. Like I believe there's a Dr. Seuss book, The Sneetches, and titles like that. So again, we can definitely cater materials for what you're looking for. I would have to see the list of titles in front of me for the trunks to get a better answer as far as the trunks go. But if you needed a classroom lesson or what have you, again, we could definitely cater that for the grade level.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just looking to see if there's any hands up.
And Jodi, real quick, I just wanted to correct myself on one thing about the there are some historical fiction titles in the fifth grade trunk. I just wanted to clarify.
That's great.
Thank you.
Okay,
All
well,
right, well,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, we will be posting the presentations and the recording of the webinar. You'll get an email from Jodi when that is posted so that you can share it. And you'll be receiving your certificates of attendance from me, sbedry@tampabay.com. So I'm not spam. And if you have any questions, I just put both of our emails in the chat. Feel free to email either of us.
Thank you so much for doing that. Okay, well, if nobody has any more questions, I will give you your 6 minutes back. We will contact you tomorrow about the drawing.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Yes,
Thank
stay
you.
warm. And
Thank you all.
Yeah, it was, but